All right, guys. Today we're going to talk about Cornell Notes. What are they? Why you should care about them. So to start off with our essential question, how will you be expected to take notes when you're in American history class? Notes are incredibly important. Remember, part of your grade is dependent on taking notes. So to start off, let's talk about some background just a little bit. Why should you even bother taking notes at all? Scientific studies show that if you do nothing, if you just sit there and listen to your teacher, you don't take any notes, you're going to forget 60% of that information within about 14 days. If you forget 60%, that means you only remember 40%. If all you remember is 40% of the information, you will not do very well on a test. If you take some sort of notes, you're going to remember about 60% of the information. Now, 60% of the information remembered is a lot better than 60% of the information forgotten. But if all you have is 60% of the information, you're still not going to do very well on a test. If you take organized notes and you interact with those notes afterwards, studies show that you'll remember roughly 90 to 100% of the information you take in indefinitely. And if you can remember 90 to 100% of the information that your teacher gives you, you're going to do really well on that test. All right. So what makes the difference with this thing called Cornell Notes? So Cornell Notes are kind of unique in that everything they do is organized. You always have a label on there. You always have your name and your date, your class period, all that stuff. That information helps you stay organized. They always have a place for you to put things like topics and essential questions, things that help focus the information or focus what you're taking in that information. They always have a main section that has two parts. One part is called the notes section. That's where the teacher gives you the information. That's where you write down what the teacher says you need to remember. They also have a section called the Q section or the interactions section. This is where you actually take those notes and you do something with them. A lot of times it's referred to as the student output, what you do with the information the teacher gives you. Lastly, at the very bottom, there's a place for a summary, a place for you to reflect on all that stuff that you've done, the information the teacher gave you, your interaction with that all goes together in the summary. Remember what I just said about remembering information. Organized notes plus interacting with the notes leads to remembering the stuff. That's where Cornell Notes is a little bit different. So how do they actually work? All right, imagine, if you will, you have a blank sheet of paper. Most of the time, if you're in a class, the teacher is just going to come in and say, okay, get out a sheet of paper. Let's take some notes. Write this stuff down that we have on the board. Cornell Notes is a little different. You actually have to get ready to take notes. Part of that is you have to set up your paper. What you have to do is you have to draw a series of lines that kind of start to divide that paper up. In the top right-hand corner, that's where you put your name, the date, the class period. Just to the left of that is where you write down the topic of the notes you're about to take, the unit that you're working on, the specific information you're going to take in. Just under that, you write down the essential question, the big overarching question that everything else you're about to do is to help answer. That's how you get your notes set up. Once you've set your paper up like this, you are ready to hit the ground running and start taking notes. When you take your notes, they go in the notes section. When you're doing your notes, guys, remember to get the basic information. Don't get so bogged down in all the tiny little details or the extra little stories that might be thrown in there. Be sure you get the basics. Use bullet points. When you're taking notes, don't write everything down in complete sentences. It takes way too much time. Bullet points are the way to go. You may even have to create your own type of shorthand. This isn't really anything that I can teach you. This is something you're going to have to come up with on your own. Here are a couple little tips for you, though. When you're making up your own shorthand, bold things, make things stand out, underline things, highlight things. If it's bolded, if it's underlined, if it's highlighted, that means it's going to be important. If it's emphasized, in the information the teacher gives you, emphasize it on your paper. When you're taking notes, when you're writing down information that the teacher gives you, make sure you write down these things: key words, main ideas, and in a history class, be sure you get the dates down. Dates are incredibly important. Now, just a little helpful tip: don't worry about writing everything down word for word. It takes way too much time. Time is a valuable thing. You don't want to waste it. That's where the shorthand comes in. Abbreviate things, but be sure you get the main ideas. Be sure you get the big basic pictures. All right. Once you've taken notes, once you've gotten your teacher input from things like lectures or presentations, videos, documents, texts, it's time to start interacting with your notes. That goes over in the Q section, or the interactions section. After you've taken the information in, after the teacher's given you that stuff, when you interact, what you want to do is you want to restate your main ideas. Put it in your own words. A teacher doesn't want you just to regurgitate what they've already told you. They want you to tell that information in your own words. When you interact, you can also come up with questions. Questions are a fantastic way to interact with your notes. In any given bit of information, there are only so many questions that can be asked. And think about it. How is a teacher going to make sure you know the information? They're going to ask you questions. If there are only so many questions that can be asked, there's a good chance you'll come up with some of the same questions your teacher's going to ask you. So get in the habit of starting to think, what kind of question could I ask about this stuff? Draw pictures. When you interact with your notes, pictures and diagrams can be a fantastic thing. Here's a little tidbit. Our brains remember pictures a lot better than we remember words. Draw some pictures. They don't have to be great works of art, but think about doing some pictures or diagrams. Guys, when you start interacting with these notes, when you restate main ideas, write questions, draw things, that's when the learning starts to happen. That's when the information starts sticking in your brain. That's what you want to happen. So you may be asking yourself, this is great, but this idea of interacting with my notes, that's a little bit confusing. Well, I've got you covered. Take a look at this chart or this picture, this poster. These are fantastic ways to interact with your notes. We've already talked about a couple of them. Write down main ideas, point out the main ideas. If they're vocabulary words, write those down. Again, questions. Come up with questions that you think might be asked. How are you reacting to the information? Is something that you wrote down in the notes section, do you have a strong feeling about it? Write down your reaction. We talked about drawings. Draw some inferences. Try to make some conclusions based on the information that's given to you. If something is very interesting and jumps out at you, write it down. Say, hey, that was pretty cool. If you have an opinion about something, write it down. If there's some connections to be made, this person was at this place, that's why they did this thing. Write that down. Or if there's some major significance about some information, write it down. Guys, those are perfect ways to start interacting with your notes. So after you've taken notes, after you've interacted with the notes, the next thing you have to do, the last thing you have to do is do a summary. The summary goes at the very bottom. Summaries don't have to be overly complicated. Keep them relatively short. You're not being asked to write a massive paragraph or a big giant dissertation. A short summary, roughly 2 to 3 sentences. And when you do your summary, get in the habit of doing them in complete sentences. Now, for the rest of your notes, for the notes section, for the interactions, you don't have to do those in complete sentences. But get in the habit of writing your summaries in complete sentences. This is fantastic practice for if you have to do an essay, or answer a question down the road. When you do your summary, be sure your summary includes an answer to the essential question. Remember, the essential question is going to be that kind of big overarching question that covers all the stuff that you just took notes about. Your summary should answer that question. It's not that hard. Guys, that's Cornell Notes. So big takeaways from these things. First of all, remember that note-taking helps you remember. All right? If you interact with your notes, you remember more. By using Cornell Notes, your notes are automatically organized and you're forced to interact with them. Guys, it's a win-win. Not to mention, in American history class, those notes are part of your grade. If you don't do your notes the Cornell way, it's gonna hurt. So go ahead and get in the habit. Do Cornell Notes.